If you're like me, you may have noticed something in the air. Ever since Donald Trump won the US presidential election, some on the left seem to have taken a distinctly pessimistic turn when it comes to left-wing organizing and left-wing projects. The argument sometimes goes that the issues are fringe and that they don't connect with ordinary people. And the suggestion can sometimes seem to be that the left should give up on those issues and the people they concern in favor of a wider electoral acceptability. But just this week, one of those so-called fringe issues has hit right at the heart of American politics. Sarah McBride is the first out transgender woman to be elected to the US House of Representatives. She represents the state of Delaware. But instead of being able to get on with the job of improving the lives of her constituents, she's been dragged into a battle over which bathroom she'll be allowed to use. Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace is pushing to block McBride from using women's bathrooms in her place of work, and she has the backing of the Republican Speaker of the House. US network ABC caught up with Mace on Capitol Hill, and I should warn you that some may find Mace's comments pretty upsetting.
With your piece of legislation about banning women from using...
100% yes.
My question to you is...
And it doesn't go far enough. I'll be filing more bills.
You have said that it was created in response to Congresswoman-elect McBride.
100%.
But should legislation be created targeted at one specific person?
It doesn't mention anyone in the legislation, but
you've said it was aimed at her.
No, I have said it's a result of this. I'm not going to allow biological men into women's private spaces. I will stand in the brink and stand in the way of anyone on the radical left who thinks that it's okay for a penis to be in a women's locker room or a bathroom or a changing room. Hell no. I'm not going to stand for it. And the speaker said it would be in the House rules package. If it's not, I'll be ready with a motion, a privileged motion to force a vote on this. This is not okay. I'm a survivor of rape. I'm a survivor of sexual abuse. And I'm not going to allow any man in any female private spaces.
Now, Speaker,
end of story. And by the way, I'm getting death threats from men pretending to be women. Why is it that these crazy people, the insanity, the radical left, are willing to kill women over a man's right to be in a women's restroom?
Speaker Johnson has said he wants to treat every new member with the words dignity and respect. Forcing this congressperson to go into a male restroom, is that dignity and respect?
Forcing women to share private spaces with men is not dignity and not respect. And I'm absolutely going to stand in the way of anyone who thinks it's okay for a man to be in our locker room, in our changing rooms, in our dressing rooms, in women's bathrooms. And in fact, if you agree with that, you're crazy.
Now, that was some intensely transphobic nonsense, but I think it was worth showing and is an example of what trans people face, especially in a climate where the right controls so much of the media narrative over their existence. And is that really how most people want trans women to be treated, just for trying to do their jobs? Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had, I think, a pretty good response to Mace.
What Nancy Mace and what Speaker Johnson are doing are endangering all women and girls. Because if you ask them, what is your plan on how to enforce this? They won't come up with an answer. And what it inevitably results in are women and girls who are primed for assault because people are going to want to check their private parts in suspecting who is trans and who is cis and who's doing what. And so the idea that Nancy Mace wants little girls and women to drop trow in front of who? An investigator? Who would that be? In order because she wants to suspect and point fingers at who she thinks is trans is disgusting. It is disgusting. And frankly, all it does is allow these Republicans to go around and bully any woman who isn't wearing a skirt because they think she might not look woman enough.
Now, for her part, Sarah McBride has responded with remarkable grace, saying this: "I'm not here to fight about bathrooms. I'm here to fight for Delawareans and to bring down costs facing families. Like all members, I'll follow the rules as outlined by Speaker Johnson, even if I disagree with them. This effort to distract from the real issues facing this country hasn't distracted me over the last several days." Now, there's no doubt that being confronted with the right in power is a dispiriting moment, but does the mood of pessimism mean that we should abandon what are considered minority positions because they'll never translate into victories that change the course of history? Well, history itself says no. The weekend, as we know it, was hard won by the efforts of trade unions and workers. In the 19th century, workers would only have Sunday as a rest day to recover from the week, although many observed the unofficial and secular custom of Saint Monday, where workers would take Monday off to claw back a little bit of leisure time. By the early 20th century, trade unions were campaigning for a full 2-day weekend and a 40-hour working week, making up 5 8-hour days. No longer would workers have to take whatever long hours bosses and factory owners decreed. It took mass strike action met by bloody police violence in the form of the Battle of George Square, an intervention by Boots the chemist, and an increase in trade union membership following the Second World War for the weekend to become standard practice in the 1930s, not even 100 years ago. But this victory was not handed down benevolently from above. It was fought for by working class people and won. Civil rights for Black Americans were similarly hard won by nonviolent direct action and civil disobedience for decades. Segregation and discrimination was enshrined in law, and white people could murder their Black counterparts with impunity. Civil rights activists were met by racist mob violence and police brutality, but they were not deterred and eventually won landmark victories, striking down racist laws and banning discrimination. LGBTQ+ rights were seen as unpopular fringe issues relating to sexual deviance well into the 1990s in the UK. Let's not forget that Margaret Thatcher's Section 28, preventing the discussion of queer identities in school, was only repealed in England and Wales in 2003, 21 years ago. And across the Atlantic, same-sex sexual activity was only federally decriminalized in the same year. In the 1950s, homosexuality was listed as a mental disorder by the American Psychiatric Association. Queer and trans people were arrested for their sexuality and gender presentation. They were forced into psychiatric care and put on government lists. Gay men were essentially abandoned and left to die by the Reagan administration during the AIDS epidemic. But a spontaneous collective uprising after a violent police raid known as the Stonewall Riots in 1969 sparked a gay rights movement that conservative and religious leaders in the US are still, to this day, trying to suppress. The Stonewall Uprising was led by Black and Latina trans women like Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera. Public opinion in the US may be divided on trans rights in 2024, as well as in the UK, but it doesn't mean that the same shift that perceptions of same-sex marriage has undergone can't apply here. Working class people having the vote, women being able to vote, the abolition of slavery, civil rights, LGBTQ+ rights, protections for workers, these were all once seen as fringe issues by the majority. But now they're so familiar that we take them for granted. The social issues we care deeply about don't have to be viewed in opposition to the left's economic project either. They should go hand in hand with economic justice, even in the face of the crushing stranglehold of neoliberalism as a grip of us all. And this is also not to say that we shouldn't be taking time to reflect on messaging strategy and how we win people over. But I guess remembering why we're on the left and those core values of respect, peace, dignity, and fairness is vital. Now, I'm about to be joined by Francesca Fiorentini, a journalist, comedian, and host of the Bituation Room podcast. Francesca, it's really great to have you here. How are you?
Good. Yeah, Stephen, nice to be with you. And I thought that was a brilliant rundown of what's been going on just in the few weeks since Donald Trump was reelected. So I'm okay. I'm disturbed. Actually, every day I get more disturbed, although I guess we have Matt Gaetz withdrawing his nomination for Attorney General. Obviously, Matt Gaetz, child sex trafficker, likely slept with 17-year-olds at sex parties fueled by drugs and whatnot. And but I think that was a brilliant intro to this issue. And I find it really disturbing the way that specifically some people on the left and progressives think that perhaps we should be cutting out our trans brothers and sisters, the trans, people in our lives, in American life, specifically in this case, in order to win over Trump voters. And that's just not just sort of morally wrong and bankrupt, just sort of reactionary as a strategy. But it also doesn't respond and speak to, I think, the trends that we're seeing in the United States. I don't think that bore out in the data. We're now getting more and more as, again, votes continue to be counted actually from the US presidential election, especially in my state of California, where you can mail in ballots the day of. We're seeing that Harris actually was the one who didn't perform. Donald Trump did worse than he did in 2020. It's Harris and the Democrats that didn't actually perform well. They didn't get their voters out. They didn't get their base out. And that was for a myriad of reasons. And I would even argue it might be because they didn't stand with trans people and have a plan to protect LGBTQ plus people, just as they didn't have a plan to protect abortion rights, right? Or they tried to outline it, but it wasn't really clear. Joe Biden not willing to do very much in that scenario, given that Dobbs came down during his presidency. But you saw these attacks on groups like trans people. You saw the attacks on Haitian immigrants legally here. And where was the counter? Where was the defense? Where was the narrative that said, no, trans people, Haitian migrants, these are part of the fabric of American society. And we stand with them as we build an economic agenda, a plan that works for everyone. As we talk about housing and healthcare and climate justice, as we talk about reproductive rights, as we talk about all of these things, and they were nowhere to be found. I mean, let alone the media. On Novara, I don't need to explain to you how the media abdicates its duty to actually humanize these groups as well. But I really think that Sarah McBride's election, I'm sorry I'm running on, but I think that her election is so pivotal. I'm glad that we're having this discussion because Sarah McBride is proof that actually something that so many of us are so easy to discount, like, oh, representation doesn't matter. That's all identity politics. No, it matters. There you had a Democratic congresswoman saying on national television very clearly, this is a distraction. I'm focused on helping everyday people, all people. And I would have liked to hear maybe a little bit more about how she plans to protect all trans people. But we wouldn't have been able to hear that had this entire mountain out of a molehill not been made by Nancy Mace, who literally is in a Cruella de Vil outfit. Everyone needs to remember that. But Stephen, I'm talking too much. I'm so fired up about it.
No, not talking too much at all. That was great. I guess I want to ask you another kind of criticism that's made of the left, which is that what this election shows and previous right-wing election shows, but perhaps for some reason this one is really coming into focus, I think, because there's an understanding that Donald Trump is offering an attractive economic solution to what you in America call middle-class people. We wouldn't use that term here, but to working-class people, as we would say here. Economically attractive packages, like populist packages, maybe involving direct economic interventions or that kind of thing. And so one kind of criticism that can be made of the left is that it's lost track of the economic argument and it's really just concerned with issues of social justice. What do you and that needs to be reoriented? Do you think that these things are separable or should be separated, or do you think they come as a package?
I think number one, we just have to distinguish with who we're talking about. When we talk about the Democrats and the Democratic leadership, that's very different than when we're talking about the left, which truly doesn't exist in this country. But social movements, those who came out against the genocide in Gaza on the streets and then were summarily, brutalized. Same thing in 2020. The children of the Great Recession, the children of Occupy Wall Street. So I just want to distinguish between the two of them. When it comes to the Democrats, I absolutely think that they use empty identity politics and sort of just rhetorically, inclusive language in order to paper over the fact that they have been hook, line, and sinker in with neoliberal economics, as well as war and militarism that have done nothing but backfire on, yes, the working class, but to say nothing of the world. And they're wildly out of step with their base, right? It's not even their base. 77% of Americans do not believe that we should be sending more weapons to Israel. And yet $20 billion later, here we are. So I just want to name that, yes, Democratic leadership absolutely uses, just surface identity politics in order to paper over their own missteps. When it comes to the left, who they like to blame, no, it was the extremists. We were catering to the extremists. They were not catering to the extremists. Kamala Harris is there saying she owns a Glock. Kamala Harris is is campaigning with Liz Cheney, someone who is so toxic, the Cheney family, that not even Republicans will campaign with her because they understand that 8 years of the war on terror under Bush did nothing but, maim and murder Iraqis and Afghans and Pakistanis and, gave us a lot of PTSD and, $3 trillion worth of debt when you talk about the working class here. But I really want us to remember, because as we talk about this, that I think that some on the left can be seduced into the idea that, yes, all identity politics are wrong without truly understanding and be class reductionist about it without understanding that the working class in the United States, your average working class person is what? Is a woman of color, just straight up. She's Latina, she's Asian, she might be working, as a domestic worker. She is an immigrant. That is who makes up the working class in this country. And so it was a massive misstep for someone like Kamala Harris to not only never say working class, she said middle class, which is funny that you mentioned that because you're right. We don't really have a middle class in this country. The idea of being upwardly mobile really doesn't exist anymore. It's about getting by. Most Americans I think it is $400 of an unforeseen expense away from being homeless or being, going into debt. That is massive. So the fact that Kamala Harris wasn't even able to say working class, and the fact that she is a woman of color and yet wasn't able to speak to the majority of women of color in this country who overwhelmingly voted for her, but who also need an economic plan that again brings everyone along, but of course disproportionately would affect and impact people of color, women in this country. So we need to parse out who we're talking about, but I do think it is a misstep. And I understand it. When you see someone weaponize, first Black woman, first Indian American woman, wow, isn't that? When you see someone simply use that as a stand-in for real ideas and real politics, I understand it makes us sour on the notion altogether. But we cannot let go of true intersectionality, of true revolutionary politics. I mean, even just the ways that Bernie Sanders was able to say, in every single one of his speeches, Black, white, Asian, Latino, gay, straight, he just, it's like everybody get on the bus. We're transforming American society.
It's so refreshing to hear someone say the words revolutionary politics. I love to hear that. But how do you in terms of reflecting on this moment, and I think reflection is probably a pretty good thing. So, and I know I'm talking about the left, not the Democrats or liberals. What do you think the solution is to the question of how we make those ideas convincing to a broader electorate? I mean, what kind of reflection should we be taking at the moment on our strategies for communicating, our strategies for organizing? Yeah, what do you think? What do you think the answers are there? Or maybe you think that gap doesn't really exist at all?
No, I think it exists, but I do think that Democratic leadership has a huge responsibility, and I think the media has a huge responsibility. And I also think that the fact that, Novara, my channel, a lot of the channels that I work with, our media outlets are struggling, right? And I know that this is, user supported, and I think that's really, really important, but it's we are living in the death knell of media, not just mainstream media, but all media. And it's really frightening when you have billionaires, truly fracking billionaires, who just funnel money into the far right media sphere in this country and get their message out there, whatever that might be, whether it's usually it's attacking trans people as inroads to their BS culture war distractions. It's all kinds of reactionary takes around how we cozy up to Israel, but cozy up to Israel, but also shun Ukraine, as you were talking about Ukraine earlier. It's so easy because fascism is very simple, right? And on the left, we have a plurality of ideas and voices and identities, and I think that is our strength. But we also are deeply underfunded. So even getting the message out there to people is really, really tough. But I will say, I think that organizing needs to happen far more locally and definitely circulating and surrounding, our workplaces. Even with some of the more, the headline grabbing stories around union drives, whether it's Starbucks and a lot of other retail outlets, Amazon, these things are awesome. But by and large in the United States, the number of unionized workers is shrinking and has steadily been shrinking. And so that I think is really critical as to how do we fight against that? I also think it's a call, and I'm not from the labor movement, but it definitely is a call to the labor movement of like, look, we throw down with Democrats every time. But also your base, your members are probably deeply unhappy about that. So what are we doing? How are labor movements going to get back to their militant and their, and their sort of wielding some power, like their militant roots, I think that is a question we're going to be confronting. And I am very much looking forward to a 2028 general strike, as UAW head Sean Fain has set out, and I think it's something to look forward to. A bright spot in this darkness.
And you've got to look for those bright spots. Before I let you go, Francesca, I want to ask you about Gates withdrawing as a pick for the Attorney General. I mean, obviously, because details were about to emerge. Well, alleged details, let's say. Do you think that we're going to see similar crumblings of some of Trump's rather weird, odd picks for his cabinet?
It's so hard because Gates was uniquely despised by Republicans and obviously by Democrats. Like everyone hated him. He would show photos of these like orgies on his phone to members on the House floor, and like say what you will about Republicans, they're like, okay, even I have a line. But it is, all I can say is I think the House ethics report that has yet to come out because Republicans blocked it clearly has some details that are far worse than things that we already know about. And perhaps they involve, working with his friend Joel Greenberg of Florida. I believe he was I can't remember his role in city government, but basically like searching for people to possibly traffic using IDs that were confiscated by police. Like that kind of depravity, again, not proven, but that's what Joel Greenberg was doing. And the two of them were bosom buddies. Joel Greenberg serving 11 years for what he did. I mean, there was also financial crimes on top of that. So yeah, I mean, good. I'm glad he withdrew his name. It doesn't change the other rapey psychos that are currently still in the mix. This is par for the course. And I also feel like deeply it matters, but it also is kind of a massive distraction, kind of deliberately, because these people are all Christian nationalists, corporate loving, extremists, religious zealots. So what are we going to do? Like, what are we going to do about it? And I think the thing that deeply frightens me is there is a lot of fatigue from 4 years of Trump prior. It's fatigue mainly from, I think, a lot of liberals and a lot of the sort of like resistance politics that really weren't able to take root, that really didn't give rise to a national organization or any kind of real policies that got put forward. We were all just in this sort of defense mode. And so that fatigue is actually leading to some institutions, whether it's nonprofits or whether it's media figures saying, you know what, maybe we can work with Donald Trump this time around. Maybe we can work with him. And that is, I think, absolutely unforgivable and actually terrifying. So I feel like grassroots organizations, real leftist radical organizations, have been left high and dry. And we're going to be seeing not just more extreme action from this administration, but maybe even, I think, an abandonment from liberal institutions of organizers and activists. And I actually think we've already seen that in the last year, given the ways that a lot of the liberal establishment and Democratic politicians allowed for the brutalization and the suppression of free speech when it comes to Palestine demonstrators. That was sort of a foreshadowing into what we will see in the future. And you just saw now a bill that was passed to give, I believe, the Treasury Secretary full reign to rescind 501c3 status from any nonprofit that it deems supporting terrorism, which of course we all know is up to interpretation, and terrorism charges are usually meant to stamp out any kind of dissent, no matter what issue it is. Could be environmental, or it could obviously be, being against genocide. And so we are in really perilous times. I don't know how else to put it.
Is there any optimism though that you can find even in the midst of all of this darkness?
June Jordan has this saying, we're the ones we've been waiting for. And I think that's so apt right now. Like, there is this sense that no one is coming to save us. No one is protecting us. Democratic Party leaders have folded. Joe Biden inviting Donald Trump to the White House as if he didn't try to stage a coup against him only 4 years ago. I mean, we have only ourselves to rely on. And I think if we're waiting for somebody, look in the mirror, that someone is you. And so I think that actually is a silver lining. And I say that not as an accelerationist who thinks things need to get terrible before they get better. I don't agree with that, because that truly means people will die. But I also think that so much of what the left has been saying in the United States and globally has borne out. And here we see it in the election, right? It's socialism or barbarism, people, right? Neoliberalism is done. It's dead. And the people who led us down that primrose path need to be excommunicated from political life. And so if this helps that, good, but it comes at a price, and it also means we have to get involved to defend our communities. I don't know. The silver lining is that, we know who's who now. We know who actually believes in, real transformation and real democracy, small d democracy, real justice, and who's willing to sell us out.
Francesca Fiorentini, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Helena, I want to come to you now, if I can, on this topic of kind of left pessimism. What do you make of it?
I mean, going to the Sarah McBride stuff that you were speaking about earlier, the reason why they've been able to do this, why the GOP have been so vociferous in making their very initial statement to be, we're going to pass this very specific thing, attacking this one specific congressperson, is because they sense weakness. They sense weakness within the Democratic Party over splits over different issues, and they want to be able to make that divide further, right? So corporate Democrats, corporate establishment Democrats like Tom Swatsy in New York, immediately, as soon as the election was over, said the problem was we were too woke. We spent too much time defending trans people. And of course, that caused some splits in terms of the more kind of populist left of the Democratic Party and the mainstream centrists of the Democratic Party. And the Republicans go, well, if the Democrats are going to have these debates with amongst themselves, let's make sure that's center stage. Let's make sure that, rather than what the message should be coming from the Democratic Party and saying, look, the Republicans ran on the fact that we care more about identity issues than on economic policy, or instead of passing economic policy to help working class Americans, they're immediately starting to do performative nonsense, which would end up having to do genital inspections for people in Capitol Hill toilets, right? This should be the immediate message that you get. But of course, because corporate Democrats want this to be the conversation, they want it to be the conversation just as much as the GOP do, because they don't want to talk about economic populism. They don't want to talk about the Bernie Sanders messages that we had all of those years ago. The GOP are going to join forces with these people to make trans people the enemy. The issue, of course, is McBride's response of conceding this ground gets people nowhere. All it will do is make sure the Republicans push further and further and further to make things even harder and try and get further concessions, right? The more you try and concede on these bits and pieces, like, for example, on issues like prisons, for example, they won't stop. They won't say, oh, well, we've got these concessions, let's stop there. They'll go, no, these people are weak and let's push these things further. You have to stand your ground. You have to have convictions. And you have to, of course, use those positions to be able to talk about why they're being pushed. Bernie Sanders is somebody who has been continually socially progressive on all of these issues, on race, sexuality, gender, and on sex. And at no point has he ever felt like he needs to concede on these issues, yet still continually stand for the populist left-wing message on the economy that he's always stood for. There was an excellent clip of him speaking to students in the 90s that More Perfect Union shared on their social media platforms, of him saying about the Republican strategy is divide and rule. If you want tax breaks for billionaires, if you want there to be big pharma control over healthcare in the United States, what you do is you create an enemy. And you won't stop them from doing that by conceding. You won't, because again, they'll just push further. But what you have to do is take things back. During the election campaign, when Kamala Harris was asked about transgender issues, she just said, I want to obey the law. She didn't say, I want to obey the law, but also protect these community, but also specifically point out and say, there is no plan. There is no plan to help working class people from the Grand Old Party. There is nobody in the Republican Party who's talking about child tax credits or dealing with the housing crisis. Nobody's talking about that at all. But she just accepted the framing and left it at that, when Bernie Sanders would have been much better at pushing back on this same narrative. So have conviction. Don't concede. Don't look at the popularists, not populists, but popularists like David Shaw, who ran the Kamala Harris campaign saying, let's just appeal to median voter issues all the time and give up on these positions that we believe in just for short-term electoral gain. And they fucking lost. They lost by conceding on border issues, by conceding on trans issues, and even conceding on loads of economic messages as well, and palling around with Republicans like Liz Cheney. This was not a winning message. If we want to take some solace, is that Bernie Sanders did better in 2016 challenging Hillary Clinton after the failure of the Obama administration to make life better for ordinary working class Americans than he did in 2020 when fighting against Joe Biden, when the threat of Trump was the problem. In 2028, there will be no Trump. He will have served his 2 terms. Liberals can't be scared away by orange man bad anymore. There has to be a vision. There has to be a project for them to believe in. The time is now when people are disenchanted broadly across American society with what the corporate Democrats are laying down. They're not picking that up. We have to offer an alternative. There has to be an alternative from the left on economic populism. And to bring that round to the United Kingdom and where we stand right now, that's exactly the position that we are in right here. Keir Starmer is polling 3% behind the Conservative Party at 25% at the recent poll just come out from More in Common. He's not popular. His party isn't popular. And while some measures in the budget did see some support, if there is no broad left-wing message to challenge the centrists in the Labour Party, the far right will be waiting in the wings. But people support our economic positions when polled, right? The Green Party are seeing a surge in support. So what we need to be doing, rather than having a pessimistic attitude and saying, oh, well, it looks like the right have won on all of these issues, we have capitulated. No, we need to challenge and be there to pick up the pieces when the Starmer project inevitably fails. When it inevitably fails, we need to be there with an alternative to what we're seeing. Whether or not we are organizing in our trade unions on the ground within our communities at a local level, whether or not we are organizing within the Labour Party to challenge the centrists in the party, no matter how much you think that that is a not particularly viable avenue, given the changes to how the Labour Party functions under Keir Starmer, whether or not you've chosen to do what I have done, which is to join the Green Party as a left-wing alternative, who have immediately been calling for things like a ceasefire in Gaza, who've been calling for public ownership of our water industry, and who have been calling for far more progressive economic positions that benefit working class people, that have been more radical in looking at increases in the minimum wage, increases in trade union bargaining that Labour Party haven't touched. We can organise to have a real left-wing alternative as well. Now is the time. It's 5 years until the next elections. There are local elections coming up in future too. There are plenty of avenues that we have to enter the discourse, to be able to convince people that our positions are correct, given that we already have popular support for them. We only need to get ourselves out there and make sure we're campaigning. We did it in 2017. In 2017, Jeremy Corbyn was polling at around 30, just below 30% when there was the chicken coup to try and remove him as leader. We got onto the streets. We talked to people. We met people where they were. We promised them. We looked at them and said, here is our progressive economic platform to fix all the damage that austerity did. We can do that again. The first thing is to get rid of the pessimism, is to think of what we could be doing if we organised. And the work for that starts now.